Welcome to Mission Majjhima, Ajahn.
Ajahn.
So, Ajahn, tell us about Majjhima Nikaya 71, the Tevijjavacchagotta Sutta.
So in this sutta, we meet Vacchagotta for the first time. He is a paribhajika, a wanderer of another religious sect or a spiritual seeker, who we find in multiple suttas, this one and the next two. So this is the first of what some call the Vacchagotta trilogy. There's a whole Samyutta, Samyutta 33, which are other instances of Vacchagotta coming to the Buddha and asking questions. And he's always a very polite interlocutor, but has a lot of questions and a lot of doubts. And the Buddha is in Vesali, comes in and decides that it's not the right time to go for alms. So he says, I'll go to visit Vacchagotta at the single lotus pond. He goes there and Vacchagotta is excited to see him. He says, it's been a long time since I've seen the Buddha. So he has a seat prepared for the Buddha. The Buddha sits down and Vacchagotta takes a low seat. So symbolic sitting. Takes a low seat and he already has a question prepared for the Buddha. And it's specifically about omniscience. It says, is it true, what I've heard, specifically that the Buddha Gautama claims to be all-knowing and all-seeing, sabanyu sabadasavi, to know and see everything without exception. Thus, knowledge and vision are constantly and continually present in me while walking, standing, sleeping, and walking. And the Buddha's response is, no, the people who report that about me are not speaking factually. What would be a factual statement is to say that the Samana Gautama has the three knowledges, specifically recollection of past lives. The second knowledge is knowledge about the arising of different beings. So what's called the divine eye. So not only can he see his own past lives, he sees how karma bears fruit over lives in other beings as well. There's this principle, this niyama, this law of karma, which is not just present in his own mind stream, but it's a universal thing. He sees all beings. When you do unfortunate things, you arise in unfortunate destinies. There is fruit and result to good and bad action. And the Buddha saw that through seeing this in multiple iterations through multiple beings. And the third is the knowledge of the destruction of the asavas, so attainment of arhatship. Vacchagotta then asks questions about the attainments of lay followers. He says, is it possible that a lay follower, without abandoning the hindrances, the samyojana of a layperson, can attain the Dhamma, i.e. become fully enlightened? And the Buddha says no. And this is in line with the general principle that arhats do not engage in sexual activity. So, and that's the kind of hallmark of a layperson, is that they continue have that sensual outlet. So the Buddha says no, lay people can't attain that. In other suttas we do find that there can be lay non-returners, but this full enlightenment, the Buddha says no. Vacchagotta then asks, can lay people attain heaven? And the Buddha says, not just one, not just 10, not just 100, not just 500, but many, many more than that. Lay people have gone to heaven. And then Vacchagotta asks, what about ajivakas, which can be translated as naked ascetic, or this other branch of spirituality, which is very broad, but is generally deterministic and doesn't teach the efficacy of karma, doesn't teach that there are fruit and results of good and bad action. These ajivakas, is it possible for them to achieve enlightenment? And the Buddha says no. And then Vacchagotta asks, is it possible for them to go to heaven? In a pretty extreme statement, the Buddha says, I've looked back past something like 93 eons, and I don't see even one ajivaka who's gone to heaven. Well, actually, he does see one. He does see one ajivaka who's gone to heaven, and that ajivaka did teach that there is causality, fruit and result of good and bad action. So yeah, this is a specific doctrine, someone teaching and believing that things are totally random or things are totally determined. That belief will not result in heaven. And then Vacchagotta hears that and delights. Ajahn, is there anything that you would like to draw out of this sutta?
This question of omniscience, sabanyu, can seem somewhat esoteric to the modern reader, but it was a common claim among teachers at the time. And so Vacchagotta, the curious character he is, it seems actually quite natural that he'd ask this, especially since he's deciding who he'll have faith in. the way the Buddha's answers is fascinating and how it's been interpreted over time. First, it's interesting that the Buddha points just to the Tevijja, the three knowledges. I think he interprets or somewhat intuits Vacchagotta's very proliferative character, and he really distills down the knowledges to what is practical and necessary, or not necessary, but really useful in terms of liberation. And this Tevijja, knowing the rebirth of himself and then of other beings, and these being the three knowledges which manifested on the night of his awakening, they're explicitly related to the ending of the defilements, the third knowledge, because it leads to this sense of dispassion with this whole cycle of samsara. So it's interesting how he distills things down to those three, although there are arahants who do not have all three knowledges, who just end the defilements. But later tradition really actually says that the Buddha could know, that the Buddha's denial actually basically meant that he couldn't know everything at all times, but he could know anything at any given time, if he directed his mind to it. The Buddha never actually says that. He claims these 10 powers of the Tathagata, and it's quite a list. He knows what is possible and impossible. He knows the karmic inclinations of beings. It's, quite similar to knowing almost anything, actually, but it's not, he doesn't actually claim that. And actually one of the imponderables, he says you shouldn't even try to think about because it'll make your head explode, is the domain of a Tathagata, of a Buddha. So it may be kind of a fruitless inquiry in some sense. But what is very interesting is he does have discourses where when people pushed on his powers or his domain of knowledge, he often would boil it down to very simple and practical principles. In the Acharya Bhuta Dhamma Sutta, Venerable Ananda is waxing very poetic about the Buddha. He's saying, I've heard the Tathagata, when he was born, light arose and the 10,000-fold world system shook and quaked, and so on and so forth. And the Buddha says, this is true, Venerable Ananda, but this also is a marvelous quality of the Tathagata. Perceptions are known as they arise, as they remain, and as they cease. Feelings are known as they arise, as they remain, and as they cease. Thoughts are known as they arise, as they remain, and as they cease. And just the Buddha bringing it all down to I know experience here and now, and this is what is key. So you can see how the Buddha is so skillful in what he teaches to who, and so often he would boil this whole question down to just the handful of leaves, and the most simple handful of leaves. And yet, it is interesting. I've asked Ajahn and Jeff about this. Is the Buddha just an arahant who got there first? Was he just the first one, but he's the same? And Ajahn Tanisra has said very clearly, no, I do think the Buddha is a unique position in the cosmos, actually. There's something very unique about a Buddha. So, we can hold this with a spacious mind. And finally, just with the part about no ajivikas ever going to heaven, just to hold certain parts of the suttas a bit with a certain relaxed grip, because not that these are in later editions, but rather who knows exactly what the Buddha was speaking to in that moment in terms of how tightly someone holds that view. Many people might not intuitively believe on a deep level that all things are fatalistic, and still not be destined for hell or something. But if you really took that belief on, if you really believed nothing I do has any result that matters, a belief embodied is lived action. And what would that lead you to do in life? Who knows how the ascetics at that time kind of practiced with these beliefs, but ostensibly very intensely and with, really taking these on, actually. And the Buddha was very critical of believing that our actions have no effect. It's a dangerous view. Anything else that you'd like to bring out of this discourse?
Yeah, so just one thing is to point people to the essay, The Buddha and Omniscience by Bhante Analio. He draws out a lot of the implications of this, pointing out that there is a genre of what is considered canonical in most of the canons, but might be actually better called para-canonical. So it kind of is considered by most historians a later strata of the teachings, like the Buddha Vangsa and the Chula Nidesa, Mahanidesa, Pugala Panyati, which is in the Abhidhamma Kathavatu. All of these mention the Sabbanyu omniscience of the Buddha, but these earlier strata, which you can learn about early Buddhist texts, don't posit that on the Buddha in such a clear way. And Bhante Noli does a great job of drawing out all those implications. If the Buddha was fully omniscient, why would he have gone into retreat and allowed all of these bhikkhus to commit suicide? Why would he have ordained Devadatta, knowing that he would cause a schism, and all sorts of other implications? If he could fully predict the future, wouldn't that indicate a deterministic world that wouldn't allow for karma and practicing Dhamma? So, a great essay.
So, Ajahn, what's the word of the week?
The word of the week is svagatam. Svagatam, which means welcome. So it's good Pali, spoken Pali. You can start right now. It's still used in India in multiple dialects.
Rare spoken Pali we can actually use day to day.